Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I shall talk about two of the, let's say, somewhat contrarian, somewhat opposite cultural practices or tendencies, you might say, two ways we process the cultural reality around us, namely philology and logophily, what I call, for the purposes of this video at least. And by cultural, I mean in a very broad sense. So basically anything that relates to human behavior and human, I don't know, relationship to other humans and other things around them, around the human beings, okay? So let's talk about like the title again, the definitions, etc. So where did I get these words? So philology is a fairly known word, right? But logophily, what is that? Like there is a term called logophilia, which means like the love for words or something like that, the love of words, like word plays and things like that. But again, for the purposes of this video, we're gonna like redefine the whole thing. So namely, like where did I get those words from? It's from Michel Montaigne, like the French philosopher, I guess you can call him, who more or less invented the essay genre of literature in the first place, like in the 16th century. Of course, there are rumors that such a person never existed, blah, 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 and perhaps they are actually correct. But nevertheless, let's assume they did, and they indeed wrote this book. Well, the book definitely exists. I mean, you can read it right now if you wish. So in particular, in one of the essays in this book, which is called On the Education of Children, among many, many other things, like if you've ever read Montaigne, you would know what I mean. He mentions that the Greek philosopher Zeno, the founder of Stoic school, Zeno of Citium, or Citium, said that he had two types of students in his Stoic school, right? The ones who were more interested in things, and those he called Filologoi, like philologists, basically, and those who were more interested in words, and those he called logofiloi, or logophilists, or logophiliacs, or whatever you wish to call them in English, right? Who, again, those latter ones were interested in words, and the former ones were interested in things. But again, as usual, for the sake of this video, we're gonna reverse this opposition and say that, okay, we're gonna call philology the thing that is centered on words because it's kind of fitting for our culture. Like literally, philology today is the science or whatever which studies languages. So let's assume that philology would be interested in words, and logophily or logophily would be interested in things, you know, like logos, like relationships between things, etc. Okay. Just like we did the same reversal we did in the video Two Faces of Scientific Communication, where I've used the analogy that Bruno Latour used in his works, analogy of Roman god Janus, which has two faces, but I've kind of reverted them. All right, as usual on this channel. So, all right. So, what exactly am I talking about? What is the difference between philology and logophily, and why is it even important in the first place? Like, well, firstly, I should make a caveat that it's somewhat arbitrary, what I'm gonna say right now, and again, at the end of the video, hopefully I would make it clearer, like, how exactly is it arbitrary? Like, it's not a clear black and white, you know, like, there are nuances, okay, but, in this introductory section, we'll assume that it's black and white just for simplicity, okay? So, the difference between philology and logophily, as we define them here, is such that philology, the thing that is interested in words, the way of approaching things that only looks at words, is the delineation of domains, if you like, the delineation of areas of culture which belong to this term, let's say, or to this area of knowledge, to this whatever, you know. So if we're saying that the culture isn't, okay, well, I'll show you a picture probably later. So this is philology. It's interested in delineating various areas. We say, okay, we give a definition to some things, and well, what is definition? It's what is does it mean to define? It means to make finite, right? To draw a border around something. So we define this as this thing, and this other thing we define as that thing, okay? So this is philology. Whereas logophily is interested in establishing connections between various nodes in the network, in the cultural network. Again, treated very broadly. So that could be in science, in society, in like something esoteric or whatever, in everyday life, in your emotional states, etc., whatever. So delineation of any sort of connections between like almost like atomic facts, as positivists or more like neo or even post-positivists call them. Okay, all right, so pretty much logophily, again, as defined here in this video, is interested in establishing connections, and it's kind of like, again, it's kind of this positivistic program that was first established by Auguste Comte, the founding father of positivism, I guess. And he's actually, again, I've mentioned this sometime before, but it wouldn't hurt to repeat myself. In this case, like I've read his lectures on positivistic philosophy, and it was a blast. Like it's one of the best things I've ever read in my life. It's so clear, like crystal clear, like it's just amazing. Like it's just a piece of art almost. So basically what he says there, among other things, is that science should only be concerned with connections between phenomena, right? Science should not be concerned with what phenomena are intrinsically, like what possible metaphysical or even religious reality might stand behind them, right? We're just interested in fact A is connected to fact B, or like observation A is connected to observation B, or something like that, right? We like push the body A here, and the body B starts behaving funnily, right? We do it again, and it happens again, right? We are not concerned what the body A is intrinsically, what the body B is intrinsically. We're only concerned with this connection between them, which is observable, again, through our experiments, like through, experimental experience. That's a bit of a tautology again. Again, as usual for this channel. So, in some sense, you might say that, this dichotomy between philology and logophily, again, returning to a more broader consideration. So, it's like philology versus logophily is almost like society versus nature, or science, more precisely, right? So, in society, we have laws that this is the same dichotomy that Bruno Latour himself uses, that again, I've talked about this already somewhere, but just a quick brief reiteration is that he says that somewhere during modernity, at the start of modernity in 17th century, with the works of Thomas Hobbes, Robert Boyle, and some others, we've kind of divided the whole everything around us into society separate and nature separate. And so in society we have established our laws, and in nature we sort of like discover its laws, right? But inherently those two spheres are divided. Yet Latour says that this division was only apparent. It was kind of like not real, virtual, right? And as time went on, it became clearer and clearer that these areas are actually tightly connected, and what he calls hybrids appear, something not quite sociological and not quite naturistic, not quite scientific, right? Something in between. And again, I gave you the examples with climate change and blah, 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 and many other things, which are both political and scientific at the same time. Okay, so philology versus logophily equals, or approximately equals to society versus nature or science, roughly equal to ought versus is. Again, this famous guillotine of Hume, David Hume, who said that you cannot derive an ought from is, right? Where ought is exactly that, the societal aspect of thing, like you ought not to do that, for example, whereas science is not concerned with that, right? Science just tells you what is, sort of. So, and there is no connection. Again, this guillotine clearly shows this division, or apparent division, that we had, right, previously. So, philology versus logophily, roughly equal to society versus nature, roughly equal to ought versus is, roughly equal to fiat versus factum. You know, or like a declaration versus investigation, or something like that. So in society, again, what is fiat? Well, you probably heard about fiat money, right? It's like the money that we declare are actually worth something, and it is only our declaration that gives them value, right? So if you consider a $100 bill from a scientific point of view, from logophily, they would say, well, it's a paper with some extra thingies added to it, but ultimately it's a paper, right? Whereas if you consider it from the philological point of view, it says, well, it has a lot of value. You can buy a lot of stuff on it, right? So yeah, so this is the difference, pretty much. This fiat declarative character, we define a $100 bill as not just a piece of paper, but actually something much more than that, right? On $100, you can actually buy like a lot of paper, right? So it's not just paper in the first place. And whereas for science, again, it's more or less just paper. Okay, hopefully it's understandable. And the principal difference, again, I reiterate the same caveat I made before. I'm deliberately kind of making it black and white-ish, just for the ease of understanding of what I'm talking about in the first place. So the principal difference between those two is clearly a complete arbitrariness of the societal thing, of philology, right? So we might define whatever we want in whatever way we wish, right? And nothing, like the universe is not gonna slap us for not doing the right thing, you know, not following the truth, because there is no truth. It's completely arbitrary. Philological definitions are, at least, and they are not falsifiable, obviously, right? So whereas logophilia-ish definitions, or like proceedings, let's say, are falsifiable, or at least they strive to be so, all right? Okay. Well, I could probably talk a bit more, but I kind of wish to make this video a bit shorter, so if you would have some questions, then ask them in the comments, I guess. Well, one question you might ask is, why the hell do we need all of that, right? It's kind of an obvious one. So I'll give you a couple of examples, so you could like feel the thing, right? I'll give you actually one example from society where like both of those examples would actually be concerned with philology mostly, but they would be from different domains, okay? One is from society, and it's a recent outrage about Texas abortion law. I don't know all the details, etc. I'm just concerned, as a philosopher, I'm only concerned with the deeper layers of culture that this thing have disturbed, let's say. And this video is exactly about that. It's sort of like a generalization of what is happening, and like, yeah, like not just talking about this isolated fact of whatever abortion law was passed, but rather talking about the deeper, like, cultural roots of what is going on. So in this sense, and by the way, like, it's funny how my body, my choice again became a thing with regards to that, whereas for vaccinations it doesn't work for some reason. But there you go. And no double standards at all. So, okay. By the way, in terms of vaccinations, see my video, how was it called? Final Frontier, yeah. Okay. yeah, with regards to abortion. So, like, roughly speaking, the liberals, even though I wouldn't call many of them that, but anyways, say that abortion should be legal, 100%, whatever, no, like, terms, or whatever. And roughly speaking, conservatives say that abortion should be banned because, well, like, you're killing a human being, etc., etc. So, what you can see here, and like from week 7 or 6 or 10, I don't remember, you have a heartbeat, therefore it's a human being, therefore blah, blah, blah. You shouldn't do an abortion. But you see the problem. Like, the central problem here, I believe, is a philological problem, and it's what do we call a human being, right? Because basically, if a fetus is not a human being, then it can be killed, probably. I mean, we kill animals all the time, and nobody seems to be, well, somebody is concerned, but it's still allowed pretty much everywhere. So, well, unless you're like especially cruel to them or something like that, but you get my point. So the question is basically how we define what a human being is. And as you can tell already from this super long introduction, or rather the main body of this video, the definition is arbitrary. We might say a human being starts from conception. We might say a human being starts from week 1 of pregnancy. We might say a human being starts from 1 month of pregnancy, or 2 months, or 3 months, or we might say that the human being starts from birth, right? So there's a whole spectrum of possibilities of definition of what a human being is. And so it's a question of philology. It has nothing to do with logophily, right? Logophily tells you we have a heartbeat at week N, right? Whereas philology says, do we call this a human being then, or not? And some people say we do, some people say we don't. And as you can tell, again, it's completely arbitrary, and therefore, and this is probably the scariest part, is that this discussion cannot be solved principally. There is no truth, you know? You can call, again, a human being whatever you wish from this spectrum. So it's principally unsolvable, so this discussion is gonna go on forever, pretty much. Like it's a dangerous divide potentially that we have in our society, right? Then, if you look a bit further, it's not what is being discussed exactly, but I'm a philosopher, I need to give you a broader perspective, right? You might ask, well, why is this spectrum only limited by birth? Like, can we call a 1-year-old child a human being? Well, any, like, you know, decent, sane, normal person would say, yes, we can. It's definitely a human being, 1-year-old child. But then a bunch of other questions arise, like, if it's a human being, it should have all the human rights, like all of them. Why do we discriminate against children if they are just as human as we are, adults, I mean, right? Why don't we allow children to freely drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, drive cars, vote on elections, right, etc., etc.? Why is there this ageism, if you know what I mean? Like, why is this discrimination by age? Because it clearly is there, right? And it opens up a whole other kind of worms, right? Which essentially is the same kind of worms. Like, what do we call a human being, right? So, is there something wrong with children as human beings? Why we don't allow them to do all of that? Okay. Good question. And it's a philological question. Because again, how is it solved? How is it? It's solved by fiat, by declaration, right? We define, okay, in this country, we are going to call a human being everything after 10 weeks of pregnancy, right? Okay. And we define an adult who is completely eligible for drinking and smoking and doing all kinds of other things from 18 years old or 21 years old. By the way, notice it's different in different countries, right? So it's a clear indication that it's a fiat. It's a declarative type of establishment of this whole thing, right? Okay, hopefully it's understandable to you. And again, I'm not going to give you any answers here because there are no answers, principally, just as I've elucidated above. I can give you another example, for example, like racism or like Nazis, like speaking about what we define as a human being. Well, apparently Jews, black people, like maybe Asians, gypsies, Slavic people are not human beings according to Nazis, right? They are Untermenschen, like under people. So they're like a different kind of, like not even human, but like alive stuff, almost like animals, like, right? So, and again, it's made by fiat. We declare that they are not human beings and are to be utilized, you know, whatever you want to understand by this word. Okay. Yeah. So it's a much more difficult question than it looks on the surface. That's what I'm saying, basically. But I hope you see how it reveals like this internal mechanisms, like internal gears of philology. Like it's a very powerful thing, right? Our definitions of domains, like here we have human beings, here we have Untermenschen or children or whatever. Or fetuses, you know. So again, hopefully it's a good illustration of that. Whereas it has nothing to do with actual knowledge of how, let's say, human beings evolve, etc., etc. Well, maybe a little bit, like it's a little bit informed by that. Like people look at children, they think, okay, children behave stupidly, we shouldn't allow them to do anything dangerous because they're gonna harm themselves and maybe even others, right? So, but strictly speaking, it's fiat, right? Anyways, so another perhaps a bit more curious example that I have for you is, again, it's sort of philological, and it's with regards to the moon, astronomy, that is. So let me just give you my statement first. So for many years, at least 6 years, I think, I've been claiming that the moon is not a satellite of Earth, and it sounds preposterous and ridiculous until you hear the second part. The moon is a quasi-satellite of Earth, okay? So let me explain what I mean by that. Well, it's gonna be kind of hard. Okay, let me give you a logophilistic evidence for the moon not being a satellite of Earth. The orbit of the moon around the sun is always convex. So there are no, you know, like, apparently, like intuitively you might thought, okay, the Earth revolves around the sun. For you it's probably like this, yeah. The Earth revolves around the sun, and the moon revolves around the Earth. Therefore, the motion of the moon as perceived from the sun should be something like this, right? Like this wave. Etc. So it should have those dips towards the sun, right, here and there, where it during new moon it comes in front of the Earth with respect to the sun. But in reality, there are no dips. Like the elliptical orbit of the moon, or roughly elliptical, of the moon around the sun is a pretty clear ellipse without any dips. It just has a slight fluctuation caused by the Earth, but it's not enough to make an actual dip so that the tangent line would cross the lunar orbit. It never happens. All right? That's one piece of evidence. Another piece of evidence, that they're all kind of connected. Another piece of evidence from logophilistic side is that the sun actually attracts the moon 2.21 times stronger than the Earth attracts the moon, which is a single case in the solar system, all right? So technically, the moon really orbits the sun because it pulls it much stronger than the Earth does. And again, it's the only occasion of such in the solar system, of such satellite, which is not a satellite as I claim. Then the orbit of the moon has a positive curvature, which is again another way of saying that it has no dips. So it's always convex, right? And then the acceleration of the moon towards the sun is always positive. So even when, let's assume I'm the Earth, you are the sun. So when the moon is between the Earth and the sun during new moon, you would assume the Earth would actually pull it towards itself. So the overall acceleration of the moon would be towards the Earth. So it would start falling onto the Earth, in orbit further towards the full moon. But it's not the case. The acceleration of the moon is always towards the sun, always positive towards the sun. That's pretty much it. And again, all of these are unique to the moon. Oh, by the way, the orbit of the moon, the inclination of the moon's orbit around the Earth, which, well, you understand, is not fixed to the Earth's equator even, which is again unique thing to the Earth-Moon system in the solar system. And why is that? Well, because the moon doesn't orbit the Earth in the first place. Its inclination is fixed with respect to the sun, not the Earth, right? Hence, with respect to Earth's equator, moon's orbit around the Earth inclination changes. And it's completely understandable if the moon is not a satellite of the Earth, which it isn't, I claim. So I would claim that a philological redefinition of what a satellite is, and is the moon a satellite, is required. But you see, the thing is that, and it's a very curious case, there is no definition of a satellite. Like, natural satellite of a planet. And I mean, no definition, I don't mean like on Wikipedia or any other trash bins like that. I mean, given by International Astronomical Union. They have a definition of a quasi-satellite, and the moon fits in perfectly, but they don't have a definition of a satellite at all. So I cannot claim that the moon is not a satellite because there is no definition of a satellite in the first place. Like, I assume they think it's kind of obvious what a satellite is, but in this particular case, I think it can be clearly shown that it isn't obvious, right? Do you remember how much fuss the redefinition of Pluto as not a planet, another philological case, caused, right? So one would probably assume that they would at least turn some attention to the definition of satellite and at least write the effing definition, but it's still not there, all right? So there you go. By fiat, we pretty much call, by we I mean humanity, we call the moon a satellite, whereas all the logophiliac-ish facts show that it's actually not a satellite, but a quasi-satellite. And what is a quasi-satellite? It's basically another body which moves in a one-to-one orbital resonance with a certain planet, in this case Earth. So the moon just basically shares the same orbit with the Earth around the sun, well, more or less the same. So it makes it look like the moon is orbiting around the Earth, all right? Because it's always somewhere there. And the Earth obviously perturbs its orbit around the sun, because the Earth is somewhat of a big deal in the near environment. Yeah, so the moon is a dwarf planet moving in a one-to-one orbital resonance with the Earth, but it's not a satellite of the Earth. It's a quasi-satellite of the Earth. Basically, this is my conclusion. But unfortunately, again, in philological terms, I have incomparably lower political power than the International Astronomical Union and our whole culture, which claimed for thousands of years that the moon is our satellite, and shut up, therefore. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about, so this, I'm already emerging from this rabbit hole of abortion and the moon. Those were two examples of how philology works and why is it important, okay? Again, in case of satellites and quasi-satellites, again, those, and planets even, those definitions are also arbitrary, as you can see, and they also shift with time even, right? So they are not even like something given, they are something produced by fiat, by convention, all right? So one important, okay, firstly, like a not important thing is that this division into philologists and logophiliacs somewhat mirrors the Soviet division on what we call, or maybe not even Soviet, maybe it was in previous pre-Soviet era as well, but in Soviet era it definitely flourished. So in Russian they say lyriki и fiziki, which means like lyricists and physicists, roughly speaking. So lyricists are people who are into humanities, you know, like arts, literature, philology, again, like philosophy, whatever, law, things like that. And people, physicists are the ones who are into like math, chemistry, maybe biology, slightly less so, like programming, those kind of STEM, basically, right? Probably. Yeah, engineering, things like that. So, like humanities versus like technical sciences or technical whatever areas of knowledge. So it's kind of mirrored there, right? Okay. So here we should talk a little bit about logophily itself. So previously I've almost depicted as something like pure and like true, right? Whereas philology is this rogue kind of thing which does all these weird redefinition, again, definition of gender or sex. By the way, see my video, understanding gender, is also a pretty prominent thing in today's society. What else? Like redefinition of race, I guess. Redefinition of what else is new? I don't know. Whatever. There's a lot of things going on, so I can't even keep track of them. Oh yeah, redefinition of like what is rape, for example, right? What is harassment, etc. I've already, like, if my channel was monetized, this video would be non-existent already, probably. Okay. Like I've already tingled some bells, probably, for the algorithm. Anyway, so, jingled bells? I don't know. So, let's talk about logophily, right? This second part. So, my point was, it's not as pure, etc., as it may have seemed. And, in particular, there are political agendas in logophily as well. Like, how we build our networks in science is not entirely, like, altruistic, objective, and true, right? And hopefully you can understand this. Like, what we currently consider, like, what mainstream science currently considered true, being true, like all the concepts, all the definitions, and all the assumed connections between objects may not necessarily be true. Again, see my previous videos on all of that. Like I have like basically every third of video I make is about science. Actually, every first in the blocks of 3. So there's plenty of them, like maybe 20 something already. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about here is that this philological bane, in some sense, is also true with science. So again, it isn't like black and white philology and logophily. Like, firstly, logophily in itself is sort of crooked, I don't know. But also they overlap to a large degree, philology and logophily, okay? And definitions in science also play a huge role not just in like literal sense of what we call a planet or a moon, but in practical sense, because certain theories, let's say, treat certain concepts differently than other theories, etc., etc. And the only way of actually dealing with this, the only sane way, I would say, is conventionalism of Poincare, right? What is conventionalism? Well, it's basically acknowledgement of the fact that we establish our concepts, our ideas about nature, which we later utilize in our theories by convention. We just say, okay, we're going to consider that the space is flat, like we have 3 perpendicular coordinates, and the time is absolute. This is a convention, all right? We might have a different convention. We might say, okay, the space, its picture, and how time goes depends on how you're moving, let's say. That would be a different convention, right? Etc., etc. And Poincare himself has shown that, for example, and I think I've mentioned this already in one of my other videos. I apologize, my ear is very itchy. It's not actually the ear, but like the inside. Like I'm almost like getting a cold or something like that. So, okay. Poincare himself talked about the fact that we can actually describe the very same physical process. Imagine an arbitrary process, a motion of a particle in some liquid, for example, by using straight space, like the one I've described, or maybe in spherical coordinates, doesn't matter, or using like warped space, if you know what I mean, kind of general relativistic-esque space. And it just depends on convention. Both are perfectly applicable, right? So the concept of space is conventional. It's not objectively there. It's just something that we use to describe how things are going. And we might use different things to describe how things are going, all right? And again, so speaking about like using straight space versus curved space, general relativity, as you're probably aware, uses curved space, right? Not only curved, it can even be twisted, etc. But you might have a theory of gravitation with the very same conclusions, except asterisk, I'm going to mention in maybe 10 seconds, with the straight space-time. So you can have a theory of gravitation with pretty much the same conclusions with an asterisk, with a straight Minkowski spacetime. Of course, Minkowski spacetime also depends on the velocity, but at least in terms of gravitation, it would be straight, okay? It wouldn't be curved or twisted. So, such a theory exists. It's a theory of gravity. I think it's called relativistic theory of gravity by Logunov, a Russian scientist. It's Logunov. I'm not sure if there's much material about it in English, but in Russian there is, at least. And the asterisk that I was talking about is that there are no black holes in this theory because, well, it's an artifact of general theory of relativity, as I've many times claimed, like, see my video Beyond the Border, where I talk about this in more detail. And the universe is isotropic, therefore there were probably no Big Bang in this theory. So in my philological eyes, it's a much better theory, you know, than general relativity. So go figure. Anyway, what I was intending to say is that it is conventional whether we use curved space-time with a twist, maybe even, or a straight Minkowski space-time. And even speaking about Minkowski space-time, of course, it's like it has all these like time dilation and like coordinate transformations, etc. But you have to remember how these effects were discovered, i.e., you know, derived. Theoretically, it was made by Lorentz and Fitzgerald, right? Who used the concept of ether. I mean, ether as like an absolute static thing in the universe, right? which kind of assumes like completely straight space, which is connected, I mean, in the reference frame of the ether. So the space is completely straight there, and the time is absolute in some sense, right? With respect to ether, I repeat. So there you go. I mean, it's conventional. That's what I'm saying. You might get rid of the ether. You might derive Lorentz transformations another way and consider Minkowski space and consider curved, twisted space-time. Or you might have an absolute space, absolute time ether, and like straight space, and the same conclusions with the same gravitation, but without black holes. Fortunately, not unfortunately. So there you go. All of this is conventional. So even this logophily type of thing, even though arguably you might say, okay, let me finish the sentence. Even this logophily thing depends on philological conventions and definitions, right? Which again was underlined by Poincare. Even though you might argue that, well, Eugene, you just took very remote areas of science, hardcore theoretical physics and cosmology to make your point, and I would agree, but unfortunately, I just didn't think of any other examples. But there are, I'm sure, where, logophily also depends on definitions. Maybe in particle physics, what do we define as field? Well, okay, it's also removed from everyday experience. Well, maybe something from nonlinear phenomena, like how waves propagate. I mean, actual waves on actual surfaces, like on water and stuff. Like what is a soliton? What is a dispersive medium? I don't know. I didn't think about this too much, to be honest. But I'm sure there are examples of that there as well. All right. So even logophily is inherently conventional and depends on philology to some degree. And philology in its turn depends on logophily to some degree. At least it feeds some observations into philology. Like why do people say that there is a climate crisis or even climate catastrophe? Well, it's because some people from logophily realm are saying that, oh, damn, the planet is superheating up and we're all gonna die, all right? So now by fiat, we introduce this green energy and carbon catching, or how do they call it? Carbon recycling, whatever, from the atmosphere and all this stupid crap. So, long story short, if you wish to learn more about how science works, or at least how I think science works, see my other videos on science. Again, it's literally every third video. And speaking about that, about my previous videos, I would recommend you, a lot of my subscribers are new ones with respect to my older videos. By the time I've had 15th video, I may have had only 100 people subscribed. So perhaps you haven't watched the previous ones. And I make my videos deliberately in this way that they would be evergreen, as they say, which means that even if you watch them 20 years later, they would still be relevant. At least I hope so. There are only a handful of videos that are about the current moment. And even there, I try to make conclusions about again, very deep fundamental layers of culture, which would probably have they would be applicable or relevant to other stuff anyways. So yeah. Okay. Let's conclude this round. So we talked about these two almost opposite, with an asterisk, tendencies in terms of processing culture, namely philology and logophily. I took these terms from Montaigne, who took these terms from Zeno of Citium or Citium, the founder of Stoic school. By philology, I understand the fiat, the declarative, the how would you say it, like societal aspect of things, where we try to delineate various domains of culture in the broad sense of the word. Whereas by logophily, I understand the process, the intent of finding connections between various things, right? Roughly speaking, what science does, whereas philology is roughly speaking what society does. It defines robbery as an act of bloody blah blah, right? So this is a fiat, it's a definition. Whereas like in science, there is no such thing as robbery, right? There is like conservation of energy and momentum and angular momentum and particle interactions and things like that, etc. Yeah. So, oh, by the way, did I forget to talk about the picture? Well, if I did, well, it would be stupid if I talk about it again. Well, anyway, let's hope if I did forget, then there is a picture for you right now on the screen. Again, forgive me if this is for the second time, where on one side, like, I schematically show how philology works, again, by delineating those domains. And on the other side, I show how logophily works. Like, it's not concerned, it's concerned with the nodes of the network and how they actually work, in air quotes, rather than being concerned with definitions of those things per se or domains thereof, okay? So hopefully it's understandable. Well, it's a very rough scheme, as you understand, okay? Right. Then I talked about how normally those things work in tandem and develop like parallel. So as much as our knowledge of the world grows, our definitions shift as well in tandem to it. But unfortunately, like modern cultural reality drives some excessive redefinition of things, almost like, I don't know, like OCD type of process, like when people cannot live another day unless they redefine something, all right? And like, you know, I don't know, like bring down another layer of old society or whatever by redefining some things about it. Okay, so the principal difference between philology and logophily is arbitrariness of philology, whereas logophily is at least falsifiable, or at least it claims to be so or strives to be so. And I gave you two examples with abortion and like what is a human being, like being a problem of what is a human being, i.e. a philological problem, which is principally unsolvable because this definition is arbitrary. And then I gave you my own example of the moon, with the moon, where I claim that the moon is a quasi-satellite, whereas pretty much all the other people on this planet call it a satellite. And I think they're all pretty much wrong. So that's a bit of completely modest, right, point of view from my side. Okay. I'm not saying that the people are wrong. I'm saying the opinion is wrong. The name is wrong, okay? So it wouldn't hurt to change it. So if you're gonna propagandize my point of view, thank you. And then we discussed a little bit about how logophily is not free of arbitrariness as well, and how like actual scientific networks operate, which is not a very pleasant sight to see usually, and how not only inherently it is crooked in this way, but also they overlap with philology in terms of like how do we define basic concepts like space and time, for example, and I gave you examples of general relativity and special relativity with, I mean, Lord's transformations. And I pretty much claim that the only way it can be solved is by convention, i.e. arbitrariness in some sense, i.e. Poincare was correct. But if you translate it into my previous videos, you would say, okay, it's just networks of power interacting. Like, why is this convention prevailing and not this one? Well, because this one has more political power, that's it. And again, political in a broad sense in this particular case, in a very broad sense of the word. Which I've talked about many times previously in previous videos about science. So hopefully you would be interested in those. Alright, I guess that would be all. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.